Hey guys, BlackCross here, and welcome to a random Friday video. Remember whenever I said the phrase that the PlayStation 2 Legacy was going to be on a hiatus for the month of January? Well, I realized that I didn't really have a video plan for Friday. Technically, the last video that I released, which would technically be the 2020 wish list video that I came up with, I thought to myself, well, I need to kind of get another video prepped up and stuff, and then just go down a trickling slowdown of video making and stuff like that. Well, then I thought about it again, and technically there is a video that I could make. Although, admittedly, this is a little bit late, but when have I ever been on time on certain things? Now, before I actually begin talking about the discussion in hand, let me explain how I came up with the idea of actually wanting to make the video instead of just putting it on a tweet or something like that. I feel like I have to explain myself when it comes to this particular subject. So, in the past week now, actually a week and a half, there's been a number of people on YouTube as well as Twitter, and I'm pretty sure on social media in genuine, where basically they were looking back within the past decade. Keep in mind, we are now officially in 2020, which is the start of a new decade. The last decade basically consists of 2010 all the way up to 2019. So now we are officially in a new decade. So the question is, what came out during that 10-year span of 2010 all the way to 2019, as well as any game that you thought each decade represented and had a good one or something like that. You know, the genuine, the best game of each decade type thing. And here's the problem with me. I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm not really what you would call a, there's a terminology technically where a gamer always plays the games whenever they come out and stuff like that, you know, on-time gamer or whatever. There's a term for that, but I can't think of the term. I'm sure someone will quote it on the comments below, but either way, I've never been on time when it comes to certain games. If there's a particular game that I'm wanting to play when it comes out, I'll be sure to play that one, but then there are other games that I'm like, well, I'll wait until later on to pick it up and then I'll play it then, you know, that type of thing. I've always been behind on a lot of different games, you know. You've heard me talk about several games that I've been interested in the past and multiple games I've been wanting to play and stuff, but they tend to kind of get pushed back a bit because there are other games that I'm like, oh, I want to play this and stuff like that, you know? And it happens, you know? A lot of gamers, I imagine more so than any, have games that they've been wanting to play, but they hadn't had a chance to because other games, as well as their life itself, kind of bust in every now and then. And it's like, I need to eventually play this one game, but, oh wait, there's this other game that I've been wanting to play for a long while as well. And then you got other stuff along that nature. So it kind of builds itself up to a point to where it's like almost impossible to keep up. I've never been able to do that, so in my mind I thought to myself, I can't really do the list as justice, you know. It's like I can't really do that, except I decided to actually scroll down at the list of games that came out between 2010 all the way up to 2019. And when you think of it, I actually built up a list. And it's weird because I was like, I didn't think I could do it, but apparently I could. Now, is this a top 10 of the decade? Not really, no. It's not really a top 10 at all. If nothing else, these are just the best games that I absolutely loved out of that particular year. You know, like the best of the best. If I had to pick like a sole purpose game that sticks out in my mind perfectly, these would be the games that stick out the most that has been in the past 10 years. And keep in mind, I've played a lot of different games in the past 10 years. Not just current gen, but also a lot of retro stuff. I mean, when you think about it, technically, the past 10 years, we was technically within the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. And I believe the Wii also was right in the middle of its lifespan at 2010, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And then, you know, we rolled into like the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, and then the Wii U, and then right towards the end, we are in the Nintendo Switch. So technically speaking, when you think about it, we had like quite a bit of time for 10 years. So in that time, it's not just those games. I also been playing other games as well, like other PlayStation 2 titles that I've been trying to play and everything like that, and get to know the PlayStation 2 a little bit better and stuff. And there's been a bunch of games that's come out, and I hadn't really played them right whenever they came out. If nothing else, some of them I played them whenever after all of their DLC and stuff got fully released and everything. When I talk about this list, I'm talking about them based on what year they came out. In other words, 2010, 2011, so on and so forth. But I didn't play them on that year per se, but I want to acknowledge that particular game in genuine. So when I talk about this list, keep this in mind that it's not a perfect list, mostly because I couldn't do it, but these are the games that I thought stood out among the ranks of other games that I previously played that technically come out. If there's a particular game you thought I should have picked, that's probably either because I didn't think it was interesting, or I hadn't played it, like the new God of War, or there's another popular PlayStation 4 game, but I can't even think of the name. I'll put it up here to where you guys get the idea of what I'm talking about. But I haven't played every game, so if you're wondering why, it's probably because of one of those two things. Either I didn't think it was interesting, or vastly interesting compared to the other games, or I hadn't played them. So let's just get started, shall we? We're going to first talk about 2010. Now keep this in mind too as well. This was during the previous console generation. Not this console generation, but the previous one. PS3, Xbox 360, so on and so forth. And among those games that I really enjoyed during that year is God of War 3 and Sengoku Basara Samurai Heroes. Now obviously God of War 3, that's an easy one to talk about, you know. I've been a fan of the God of War series for a long time. I played practically every one of them, including the PSP version whenever they got released for the PlayStation 3. After God of War 3 came out, keep this in mind with the HD collection. And playing through God of War 3 was really a good enjoyment. I really enjoyed it. It was definitely an advancement towards the God of War series. And we had that pretty interesting cliffhanger that we got, you know. And it's one of those things where it's like, we didn't know what was going to happen, but we knew that technically speaking, that was where God of War we thought would be the end. Years later, we had rumors, and then years later, we had the new God of War, which I haven't played it, so I can't give it a fair assessment. You know, it's one of those things where it's like people have talked about so highly of God of War and everything like that, so I can't really say for sure. But I've thought that technically speaking, we didn't really need a new God of War, considering how it ended in the third one. Maybe a prequel or something like that, but eventually you would run out of ideas, I guess. But I guess they decided, hey, let's move Kratos to Norse mythology. Again, I don't know why, don't know how, but I guess I'll find out whenever I finally do touch that game. But God of War 3 stood out because of how we had God of War 1 and 2 for the longest time. And then, of course, the PSP versions, how they looked and everything like that. And then to see the advancements that God of War 3 had, the improvements, the graphics, the details, it was pretty insane at the time when you think about it. And then, of course, Sengoku Basara Samurai Heroes. Now, I've talked about it in the past, but I don't think I've talked about it in major details now. But Sengoku Basara Samurai Heroes is the first, what you would call, Dynasty Warriors-like game that I have actually played. And technically speaking, that's actually my most favorite out of all of them, technically speaking. I haven't played every one of them, but I love that one the best. I basically played it all the way through, platinumed it and everything. And really, it was the most fun that me and my brother Delmar has had with the game. So, to me, I feel like it needs to be mentioned for 2010. But again, because of God of War 3 and Sengoku Basara, I couldn't just pick one or the other, because both of them stood out really well within that year. And keep in mind, even though God of War 3, I did play it when it came out. Sengoku Basara, I didn't really play until a couple years later, and then started playing it, and I actually enjoyed that one really well. 2011 apparently was a really good year for video games, because whenever I looked through the list, I actually came up with 3 games that stood up in my mind as really good games, and I really want to acknowledge the 3. The first one being, of course, the Dark Souls series, specifically Dark Souls 1. Now, I mentioned it in the past, but my first experience with From Software was from Demon Souls, and I couldn't get through that at the time. I tried everything, and I just decided to F it and everything like that. Then Dark Souls came up, and I knew right away that this was basically a Demon Souls recreation or something like that. And I didn't get to it right away. I didn't want anything to do with it whatsoever because it was a hard game, it was difficult, I hated it. But then to know that there was a second one that came out, I was like, why Dark Souls? Why? It's a hard game, there's no way it could be this popular. And then of course the announcement for Kingdom Hearts 3 was confirmed, and I was like, well, it's going to be years until I get to play Kingdom Hearts 3, so I'll touch Dark Souls, and that might cut a few years in terms of waiting. Well, it didn't really do that, but I played through Dark Souls, and I found myself enjoying it a lot better than I thought I would. Then again, I actually did look up on YouTube on how-to videos of how to beat Dark Souls, in terms of how to beat the bosses, or how to build a character and everything like that. And needless to say, I actually found myself liking Dark Souls a lot more than I thought I would, and a lot more than I think I care to admit, in fact. Regardless if you're a fan of Dark Souls or not, you can't help but admit the impact that the Dark Souls series have made in terms of the gaming industry. Ever since Dark Souls came out, every game that has ever been hard to play has been considered the Dark Souls of that genre, or is Dark Souls-like game. And it's like, difficulty does not define a game genre, you know? There's more to that, you know? Admittedly, like games like Sekiro, Code Vein, you know, games and stuff of that nature, they have a Dark Souls element into them in terms of building characters, in terms of combat, in terms of how you make the character, freedom of weapons, freedom of being able to use abilities and stuff like that. That's how a Dark Souls game works. But because of its difficulty, it stood out the most, unfortunately. There's more to Dark Souls, and if you're very tempted about playing any of the Souls game, but nervous about getting near them, I highly recommend actually watching a couple of YouTubers who have made guide videos on how to get through them. I highly recommend actually fighting Cowboy, as he's the one that I actually watch the most when it comes to Dark Souls content. He actually shows breakdowns of how to beat the bosses, followed by step-by-step guides about how to build a particular build. Some of them are interesting and some of them are unique, so trust me whenever I say this, Dark Souls is definitely highly recommended for 2011, but that's not the only one. Dead Exodus Human Revolution. Now, I didn't play this, again, like most of the games, I didn't play them right away whenever they came out, but Dead Exodus Human Revolution was a game that I was highly interested in, and I waited a couple of months to get it, and whenever I finally did, I regret not picking it up when it came out, because oh my gosh, that game was so fun to play. It's one of the very few first-person shooter games that I could actually pick up and play and have a field of enjoyment out of it, you know. It had a unique and very in-depth storytelling. It had a very interesting, I suppose you could say, building block element where you build up your briefcase and you build up Jensen with different abilities and stuff like that, enhancements for that matter, in order to get through either combat or get through everything in Genuine. And I really enjoyed it, Dead Exodus Human Revolution, personally myself. And then finally, the game that came out in 2011 per se was Dissidia Duodecimum. Now, when I talk about Dissidia Duodecimum, how can I say this? Technically speaking, Dissidia Final Fantasy came out before Duodecimum. Duodecimum is what you would call a sequel enhancement, per se. Basically, it's the base game, but it has the prequel story as well as a bunch of add-ons. Think of it like the original version with add-on DLC and extra content, you know? And I played it Duodecimum, and I truly enjoy it. I would argue that I think that is like one of my favorite PSP games. And I'm not much of a handheld guy, so that's something that you should remember, is that I'm not much of handheld games, but when it comes to handhelds, Duodecimum was pretty good, next to Crisis Core and a few other games. The reason why I want to recognize Duodecimum is because of how Dissidia Final Fantasy NT handles things. Now, I haven't been back to it since it first launched, but last time I played it, it was not that good. In fact, compared to Duodecimum, that was a way better, way built game than anything. It was built towards multiplayer, and it was built towards single players. With NT, unfortunately, it was built more towards multiplayer campaign. And I can't do that. I honestly cannot do multiplayer anymore. I really can't stand it. You know, there's that competitive scene, and I'm not competitive. So whenever I see a game that has multiplayer, I feel like as if I'm being pushed away from it because of that feature. But with Final Fantasy NT, I figured, hey, maybe there's some single-player campaign in there, because Duodecim had a really good single-player campaign. So I was like, you know what, let's go ahead and get it and see what it's like. Unfortunately, NT turned out to be a major flop for me, and Duodecim stood out to be the better version. And in all honesty, I still have Duodecim right now. And I hope that Square Enix will deliver a better version than what they have, but unfortunately, as of right now, it doesn't look like we're going to get a new one anytime soon. It looks like right now they're really pushing the rails for NT, and that kind of disappoints me. But with that being said, with 2011, Dark Souls, Deus Ex Human Revolution, as well as Dissidia, Duodecim, and Final Fantasy, those three are my pick for 2011. So 2012, so I'm going to tell you right now, from here on out, it kind of slows down in terms of games because they were easier to kind of pick out. But 2012 was the year that I got to see a video game that really got me hyped up for. And unfortunately, it was the last game to a series that I actually got to play, even though it continued on afterwards. And that was, of course, Assassin's Creed 3. See, the thing is that I have a huge, more or less like a huge interest within the Revolutionary War age of American history. That early age to me is kind of interesting to me, and it's kind of one of the reasons why I liked movies like, say for example, The Patriot. I kind of liked that movie. It's one of my personal favorites. But Assassin's Creed 3 was really good. It took a lot of elements that I loved it out of the previous Assassin's Creed games and pushed it out to the next level. Oh my gosh, Assassin's Creed 3 was so fun for me. I hadn't played the DLC that came out afterwards, sometime later, but if I had to go back and play through Assassin's Creed 3, I definitely would, and I would definitely play through the DLC. But I just enjoyed everything. I enjoyed building the settlement. I enjoyed taking care of the different targets that I had to go after. I enjoyed it, seeing the reference of American history and everything like that. It was just really enjoyment to me. Because while in the previous Assassin's Creed series, you had the first one, which was basically based on the Middle Ages. And yes, I do love the Middle Ages, but I like the fable side of Middle Ages, not so much the historical accuracy. So the characters I couldn't really figure out. I didn't really know who was who. And then of course you got the fact that technically Ezio age, that round, the only person I recognized was obviously that of Leonardo da Vinci, which obviously being a famous inventor as well as a famous artist, it was kind of easy. Every other one I couldn't really figure out. It did have elements that I liked it out of Assassin's Creed 2 and stuff that it carried in Brotherhood. Revelation, however, was kind of a wish-wash mess for me. And then of course after Brotherhood and Revelation, I was starting to kind of get burned out of Assassin's Creed, but then Assassin's Creed pushed that level to the next stage, and I really enjoyed it. But then whenever Assassin's Creed 4 came out the next year, I was afraid that it was going to play somewhat the same way as Assassin's Creed 3, except mostly in ocean, because Assassin's Creed 3 actually introduced sailing in the ocean in boat combat and stuff. And so I imagine Assassin's Creed 4 would be that same way. I've talked about it in the past, but Assassin's Creed 3 stood out to me on 2012. It was just a fun game. I absolutely loved that one. Now, when I talk about 2013, there are two games that came out during that time that stood out for me. Now, I know they're not the best games, I admit that, but these are, in my mind, the most fun games that came out during that time frame, and in all honesty, they deserve to be mentioned in this video. The first one is obviously that of Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Now, that game is very popular in my personal opinion. I really enjoyed the gameplay. I really had a blast with the boss fight. The music was epic. And it just, I had more fun with that. I think I had more fun with it than I thought I would, because I actually tried pushing all the way to Revengeance mode, which is the hardest difficulty in the game. And, oh gosh, Revengeance mode is really hard. I was surprised as to how far I got with the game as it is, you know, playing through normal, then playing through hard, and then be like, okay, I can do this, I can beat Revengeance, and then I'm like, no, I can't. To me, Revengeance was probably the best one next to one other game, and that's only because of the fact that there was a time where I was basically playing through a bunch of wish-wash games in 2013, and, you know, that after Devil May Cry, DMC Devil May Cry, of course, I was like, this is absolute garbage. So whenever I got into Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, I was in that pissy mood about how disturbingly disgusting DMC Devil May Cry was. However, whenever I actually went through with Revengeance, it literally washed away the DMC blues for me, and I got to enjoy a really good hack and slash game. So, if that's the reason why it stood out better compared to DMC Devil May Cry, it's for that reason, obviously. And then, of course, in that same year, we also got Pikmin 3. Now, before Pikmin 3, I had never really played any of the Pikmin games. I just knew that Pikmin 3 was coming out. I've been interested with the games to some degree, and so one day I decided to play my brother's Wii U whenever he was out working at the time. And I was like, you know what, let's go ahead and try playing through Pikmin 3 and see what it's like. And after playing through Pikmin 3, I actually enjoyed it. I really did. I was actually impressed with the gameplay. I was impressed with some of the bosses, for that matter. And I was impressed with the Wii U. For me, Pikmin 3 is what really demonstrated what they could do with the Wii U at the time. Keep in mind, this came out right as soon as the Wii U first launched. So at the time, positivity for the Wii U was kind of right there at the start. But then later on, it died so poorly, it was just an absolute mess. It didn't even last as long as what we would have hoped it would. So, with that being said, it's a shame that the only Wii U game that I actually liked it. Now, there are others I say are pretty good, but the one that stood out for most for me for the Wii U would be that of Pikmin 3. And it got me into the series of Pikmin, being able to play Pikmin 1 and Pikmin 2. And Pikmin 3 was really, really good in my personal opinion. It's a shame that we're not seeing a port for Pikmin 3, because that's like one of the last Wii U titles that needs to be ported to the Switch. And I'm kind of surprised Nintendo hadn't done that yet. Now, technically, I've played this on my channel, but 2014, Shovel Knight came out. Now, when Shovel Knight came out, it looked pretty good. It looked pretty interesting in my personal opinion. I was kind of like intrigued by the whole theming that it had with the 16-bit, or is it 18-bit? I constantly forget what they call it now. But that retro-style gameplay, and Yacht Club Games did an amazing job pushing it out there and everything like that. And not only that, they did a fantastic job of just adding on a whole bunch of stuff to the game. It has been added on numerous times. It is practically available for every console you can imagine. It's available from the PS4 to the Xbox 360, Xbox One. It's available for the Switch, the Wii U. I think it's also available for the Wii. I may be wrong. I'll have to look that up. But I know it's definitely available for the DS, or 3DS actually. So I mean, it's gotten a lot of press release, and it's gotten numerous of updates, all the way up to the Shovel Knight Treasure Trove series. And it's like, so much has been added on to that game. I am actually impressed by how much is actually in it, and I really need to kind of go back into it and kind of explore all the new stuff that they've added. But still, when it comes to 2014, when I was looking through the list, Shovel Knight stood out to me the most. I actually did enjoy Shovel Knight really well, even though by the time I got to the final boss, it was pretty difficult to beat. But before that, everything else was really fun. It was a blast playing through it as Shovel Knight. So here we are, 2015, baby! This is where we start off with some of the really good ones. For example, 2016 was the time that Bloodborne first came out. And if you know anything, I played that kind of close to when it first came out. It was sort of like a month after it originally released. But boy, like, let's put it this way, I played Dark Souls beforehand. I hadn't played Dark Souls 2 yet, but whenever I knew Bloodborne was made by From Software, I was like, this looks interesting. And I was looking at it, and it's like, it has this Van Helsing feeling, so I was kind of looking forward to it. Only to whenever I started playing the game, and got halfway through that I realized there's no aliens in Van Helsing. What the flip is this? And that's when I discovered H.P. Lovecraft. And let's put it this way, a year after playing through Bloodborne, I actually decided to look into H.P. Lovecraft and see how the heck did they come up with this game. And after looking at H.P. Lovecraft, I realized they were spot on with a lot of stuff that they've added into Bloodborne. You know, it's 100% accurate to an H.P. Lovecraft nightmarish dream. I mean, we're talking, let's put it this way, if you had to be daring enough to look through H.P. Lovecraft's original design and concept and ideals and stuff, oh dear gosh, let's put it this way, best way to put it, monsters, demonic entities from another dimension, and tentacle monsters. Let's put it this way, there's a lot of people who made some jokes about that. They're not exaggerating. There's a lot more tentacles than there should be. And I question H.P. Lovecraft, in my personal opinion, but it created Bloodborne, which is a really fantastic game. It's my personal favorite next to Dark Souls. And let me tell you, it's hard to pick between the two. You know, Dark Souls is what got me into it all. It was really cool. It was really fun. Bloodborne was a really great game. Solid gameplay. Awesome and amazing bosses. I love the gameplay of how it was more active. You had to be literally fierce. You had to literally dodge into the enemy as to opposed to dodge away or block the attack. You know, it's like, it was a change in gameplay. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's hard for me to pick which one I like better. But Bloodborne has this specific style that I love, you know. It's that fierceness that you have to go through when you have to tackle on these nightmarish beasts. And I really enjoyed it, that one. And then, of course, another game that came out in 2015, yes, there was another one, and I want to point this one out for good reasons, is The Witcher 3. Now, obviously, I played through The Witcher 3, and I actually enjoyed it pretty well. I think I got, like, the worst ending, I believe. I'm not sure, I'll have to look it up on the internet. But I believe I got the worst ending, but even if I did get the worst ending or the best ending, it didn't sour my overall view of The Witcher 3. The Witcher 3 is an impressive game, okay? You know, this past 10 years, we've entered in a new genre of gaming, which is basically an open world concept game. Now, some games, when they do open world, it's kind of mixed. You have some that do it pretty good, and then you have some that do really good, and then you have some that go into absolute dog shit, and are never talked about ever again. And at the time, the only games that ever did this was like games like Rockstar Studios. And they've been the only one that's kind of pushed this out there next to like that, even Bethesda's Fallout series. And maybe even Elder Scrolls, I'm not sure. Again, not a big thing that I've been familiar with. Those were like the only major one that actually did those at the time. But this decade we saw more and more being made, if you notice. And The Witcher 3, in my personal opinion, is like the top tier best, really, in all honesty. If I had to do a top 10 of the best open world games, The Witcher 3 would probably be right on there. And for good reason, too. For good reason. You know, you could have easily just made a game where basically it's like, oh yeah, hunt this, hunt that, retrieve this, retrieve that, do this, do that, save this person, so on and so forth. But it's how they made them into an actual story, you know? You had the fact that, technically speaking, it starts you off basically saying, hey, someone died, I need you to investigate and see how they died. So as a Witcher 3, as a Witcher, you have these abilities that allows you to see how things work, how things happen, what creature might have been involved, what actually might have occurred and everything like that. Sort of like that of the Batman Arkham series, if you will. You know, Batman, whenever he goes into a crime scene, he uses his bat visions and stuff like that to detect items and stuff. The Witcher 3 is kind of like that in a way, but he's using like a tracking style, if you will, like an actual hunting track. And it's really interesting how it plays out. Again, the way they kind of build up each individual side quest is really good. And you can even choose to either have the payment be what it is, do it for free, or increase the pay rate, you know? You can be either really nice, or you can be a stingy hunter, you know? And the main story itself is really good. It gets really, really intense at times, and you're pretty much glued to it throughout the entire game. Really, you are. It's just, oh man. I hadn't really touched the DLC, unfortunately, but I need to. I need to go back to The Witcher 3 eventually and just play through the DLC with it as well. I need to. Okay? I owe myself that to do that. But The Witcher 3 stands out pretty well on its own, and I didn't even realize it came out in 2015. I was like, dadgum, I knew it came out relatively right whenever the PlayStation 4 launched, but right alongside Bloodborne? Yeah, I was actually kind of shocked. It's like weird. But either way, those two was really good games that came out. We're already at the halfway point through the decade now. And with it being 2016, the question is, what game stood out for 2016? I regret to inform everyone that there wasn't really a major game that stood out in 2015. In fact, really 2015 for me was more or less waiting for other games, technically. You know, you had the fact that Kingdom Hearts 3 was in development. You had the fact that Code Vein was pushed back. Bloodstained Ritual of Night was pushed back. The only game that came out, though, that even though it did get pushed back, it was pushed back by 1 month, and that was Final Fantasy 15. I've stated this in my deep dive into gaming video of Final Fantasy 15, and that was that it is actually a good game. It's not a good Final Fantasy game, though, but really, I have to talk about it because that is, whenever I looked through 2016, that was unfortunately the only game that stood out to me for 2016, and that's kind of sad. Not to say that 15 was bad, but compared to all the other games that I talked about, games that pushed boundaries, games that practically tattooed themselves into my brain of how unique and crazy and amazing the game is. Final Fantasy 15, it's an okay game, but it didn't do anything that pushed the boundaries of what a Final Fantasy game represents, you know? Other than the fact that it looks great. Gameplay is alright. The open world concept is a little bit empty, if you will. So again, it's like 15 was not a bad game. It just wasn't a good Final Fantasy game. So unfortunately 2016 was not the best year, but afterwards it gets better. I'm going to have a handful of people who's going to be patting me on the back of my back whenever I get done with this video, or by the time they get done watching this video for that matter. And that is that 2017, the best game in that year was Breath of the Wild. Now, I hadn't played it when it first came out, but when it first came out, I was very interested in it, you know? It's like, I wasn't really a major fan of Legend of Zelda at the time. The only Legend of Zelda games that I had played was Twilight Princess, and I didn't really get far in that game. I lost interest in it, but then I played Majora's Mask, and that was a fun time. I actually completed that one. But then I was like, Breath of the Wild, it looks pretty good. How good is it, though? And a lot of people were building up hype for it and everything, and I got to play it this year, technically, if you remember. I was live streaming it, well, last year now, should I say last year, you get what I'm saying, 2019, summer 2019. But I got to play it, and I have to say, it is everything that everyone has talked about when it comes to Breath of the Wild. It is that good of a game. It is that good of a Wii U title. It is that good of a Nintendo Switch title. And I have to say, high marks for it. Is really, really awesome, really, really fun. The best way that I could probably describe it, the best way you can actually get a proper review of Breath of the Wild would be Arlo's great big 3-hour review of Breath of the Wild. That is insane, but that's how good Breath of the Wild is. I actually will confirm it. It is that good. So if you haven't played it, and you got a Nintendo Switch, and you're wondering about getting Breath of the Wild, get it. You won't be disappointed. It is that good of a game. Guys, I tried. I tried not to pick HD collections or stuff of that nature. I tried my damnedest, okay? I tried. There was a lot that came out in 2010, 2011, and even 2012. And even more so whenever we merged into the PlayStation 4 and stuff. And so I tried my best not to touch anything in remote to HD collections and stuff. Even though they are fun to get and everything like that. And it's more or less like getting it for that improved resolution or that improved frame rate, you know? It's the quality, not so much the high definition, but the quality that gets improved for your beloved games and stuff, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that. It was the whole reason why I got Kingdom Hearts 1.5 plus 2.5 for the PlayStation 4. I had them for the PlayStation 3. And I pushed back from getting into the PS4, but when I heard people praising the crap out of it, I was like, I guess I should play it. And after playing it, it's hard for me to go back to the PlayStation 3. Much less the PlayStation 2, which is sad because I love the PlayStation 2. But the one game that came out in 2018 that stood out to me the most, and some of you know this, in fact, Fancy Cuff, if you're watching this, you know what that is. You were with me throughout the entire time. And that is Shadow of the Colossus Remake. That game, oh my gosh, it's so beautiful! I kid you not. I love Shadow of the Colossus. It is one of my top favorite games of all time. And to see it being remade for the PlayStation 4 was just absolutely breathtaking. That was the best. I believe I played that for like 10 or so hours. The best 10 hours I played. Just playing through Shadow of the Colossus, reminiscing on old memories from whenever I first played it on the PlayStation 2, then playing on the PlayStation 3 and loving it, and then playing on the PlayStation 4 and just falling in love with it, being in tears, you know. Just the entire game brought me to tears because of how beautiful the game was. The team that did it, spot on, in my personal opinion. You guys nailed Shadow of the Colossus. It's just beautiful. Just absolute beauty. It's just, if you love Shadow of the Colossus and you've not picked up the remake for the PlayStation 4, get it. Get it now, because it's that good. It is that beautiful. You will not have any regrets whatsoever. It's just, oh my gosh, so beautiful. And it was funny because, like, for the first week ever, we actually had, like, our first big internet secret, you know, big game secret, because technically speaking, this is a remake, which means as a remake, it can add whatever it wanted. So whenever I first saw these glowing little things on the ground, I was like, this was not in the original game. So like for the next 3 hours after I found that first one, I started scouring for these things, not knowing what it would do, what it would give, or anything like that. And then for like about a whole week or so, the whole entire world was wondering what these things do. And there was like, I forgot how many there was. There was close to 900, I know that much. But there was so many of them. It was so stupidly insane. But when you get all of them, what do you get? You get a sword. And instead of it shooting out light from the sword in order to detect the location of the Shadow of the Colossus, it beams out darkness. So that's basically it. It's basically a costume sword. It doesn't improve strength, doesn't make you almighty or powerful. It's a color texture change. But it was still a fun thing to have that mystery in the game. You know, it was fun for a long time period to see that a game build up mystery even though it was technically a remake. So in my personal opinion, the team that did this one just absolutely blew it out of the park. I love it. And now we have to talk about 2019. I really didn't want to do this, you know? I really didn't want to talk about 2019 because there's so many games that just recently came out. A lot of them I'm just now finally playing, like Code Vein, I'm just right now playing. I recently played through Medieval. I also recently played through Metal Wolf Chaos. And there's still a lot of other games that I still hadn't played yet, but there's a lot of other ones that have come out, you know? Like I played through Sekiro Shadow Die Twice, and even though that won Game of the Year, which surprised me, but still nonetheless, I'm proud for From Software that made the game. I'm proud of them for getting Game of the Year for that one, because it is really good. It's really beautiful. It's just really hard. Really, really hard. But with that being said, there was really two major games that came out in 2019 that I absolutely applaud for, absolutely love. And I even did a video about it technically, talking about how my way of gaming, it may be old-fashioned, you know, because my favorite games were, of course, Kingdom Hearts 1 and Devil May Cry 3, you know, I loved those games. But Devil May Cry 5, and I'm glad it won Best Action Game. I am so proud of them for coming back strong with Devil May Cry 5. Oh my gosh! Devil May Cry 5 was really, really fun. It was really, really cool. It was really just, oh my gosh. I never thought that I would say this, but I'm glad to play as Nero. But Dante was just an absolute blast. You know, it's just having the bikes as weapons. It's just, oh my gosh, just, I had so much fun with Devil May Cry 5. It was just absolute bliss for me. And then Kingdom Hearts 3. You guys know this more than anything. I love Kingdom Hearts 3. And even though it's gotten controversy after controversy after controversy, it has not changed my mind. You know, that's the crazy thing. It has not changed my mind about what I thought about Kingdom Hearts 3. In fact, I'm going to tell you this right now. It beats my expectations for Kingdom Hearts 3. I actually thought that it wouldn't do better than 2. And keep in mind, my ranking for Kingdom Hearts games is like 1 and 2. But then after Kingdom Hearts 3 came out, it's 1, 3, 2. Like, I love the gameplay of Kingdom Hearts 3. And I know a lot of people hated it because the story was kind of scattered out. It was trying to tie up loose ends and stuff like that. But really, in my personal opinion, this was sort of like Nomura's love letter to the fans, really. I think that's what it is. It tied up a lot of loose ends. It brought back a lot of characters that people were like, there's no way it should have been like that. Because if you do that, that means that anyone could come back. Which, in all honesty, it's not a bad thing, considering some people love certain characters, you know? Because it's like seeing Roxas come back, seeing Xion come back. You know, that kind of left me very emotional, seeing the Burst by Sleep crew coming back together and everything like that. That was awesome. The gameplay, the Keyblade transformation, oh, I absolutely love them. Seeing the flow motion rise after, like, being a year before Kingdom Hearts 3's release, watching through YouTube with all of the Disney history rides and stuff like that. Those were really cool to see. And it's kind of interesting of how whole year of watching YouTubers talking about the Disney rides history and how they were made and stuff, all of a sudden, the next year, Kingdom Hearts 3 features rides as, like, attack movements and stuff. I thought that was really interesting. It was kind of, I loved it. And then, of course, to see the introduction of, like, Pixar characters, you know, like Monsters, Inc. and Toy Story. It just, oh my gosh. I know I did a review on it, and if you want to know more details about it, go look that up. But Kingdom Hearts 3 was such a really great game, and I cannot wait for the Remind DLC to come out, because that just means I'm going to enjoy it even more so. I think, really in all honesty, those two stood out for me for 2019. So, don't ask me again about 2019, okay? Because those two definitively are the best games, in my personal opinion. I know a lot of people have different opinions about stuff, and that's fine, but you ain't changing my mind. Alright then guys, that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, my through the decades of games. You know, some of them were somewhat linear, some of them was somewhat interesting, but a lot of them was like, wow, this is interesting. Wow, this is really interesting. And keep in mind, the early on games, I didn't really play them right on release date. You know, some of them I played like a year or two after they came out and stuff. And then to play through them, really love them, really enjoy them and stuff like that. And you know what? This is really a cool video to put together because I do actually plan on making another video sort of like this, but it's more so looking towards YouTube. So we'll talk about that later on. But for the time being, that's basically my thoughts for the past decade of games that I have played, games that stood out the most, and games that I think needs to be recognized for how well they were, how well they did, just being the best of the decade itself. So yeah, enjoy. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Catch you guys later.